dive specifically on Metatron.
So there are very limited texts of Enoch, this profoundly mysterious figure in the Bible. There's like 3 mentions of him. The first one, I believe, is Genesis. I know I'm on my phone in class, but I'm reading notes. The first mention of Enoch, I believe, is in Genesis 4, which we're talking Bible terminology here. That's the very beginning of the Bible. We're talking about this was probably written 2,500 or 3,000 years ago. This particular text.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know exactly who. They'll say it's Abraham. No, it's not. That's not the reality.
Right.
That's what I learned in church, but it's not true. And the first mention of Enoch is, I just had it right here. It's 4:17 and 18. Of course, it picks up here. Cain made love to his wife.
Of course, it picks up.
And she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael was the father of Methusael, and Methusael was the father of Lamech. Lamech married 2 women, one named Ada and the other Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who lived in tents and raised livestock. Now, I'm going to quit reading that text for a minute, and then there's a few more mentions of Enoch. But I'm not going to read the exact scripture because I can just give you the paraphrase. You can look it up. In the book of Genesis 5, verse 21 through 24, it tells the story of Enoch is this figure who's like Noah, the flood story.
Yeah.
He's like, I think he's his great-grandfather. And as the story goes in the Bible, like Noah and his father, I can't remember. There's so many biblical names. There's so many, especially in Genesis. Mm-hmm. There's entire chapters of Genesis where it's like name after name after name after name.
Yeah, it's like reading Dune.
Ironically, guys, there was an archbishop in like the 1600s. I can't remember his name. It's like Archbishop James. I'll have to look this up. But like, how like when you grow up in church and you what's commonly believed is like the earth is 6,000 years old?
Yeah.
Well, how they got that right was they read the book of Genesis, and then one of the Gospels is like, first there was Adam, then there was blank, then there was blank, then there was blank, then there was blank. And in the 1600s by candlelight, some dude counted up all their ages and was like, well, this is how old the earth is. Literally. Like,
wow.
I'm not playing. Like, that's it. So Enoch is this figure who's a part of the flood story, but he's like the mysterious sage, like grandpa or great-grandpa of Noah that he comes to for counsel. And Enoch has this like knowledge, and he gives him this knowledge. And then as the story goes, it says, and then Enoch walked with God, and he was not. He lived 365 years, and then he was not. It's implying that he ascended and
mm-hmm.
he didn't die a physical death.
Mm.
Then there's one other figure in the Bible who supposedly didn't die a physical death, and it was Elijah. Anyway, so that's the canonical Bible version of Enoch, right? He's just this mysterious, wise sage who there's little written about him, And then
it's like
there's
the great grandson of Adam.
Something like that.
Yeah,
like very early, like one of the first people in the biblical story. But this much is written about him, like sentences.
In the Bible, at least.
In the Bible, right. But we're gonna go deeper than that. And then I think I should have written down the scripture, but I think in the book of Jude, there's a very important mention of Enoch. You can like this one, and it's relevant. Okay, here it is. Jude chapter 1, verse 14. This is significant, dude. Okay, so for context on the book of Jude, this is one of the New Testament Gospels, meaning literally thousands of years after, the story of Enoch was supposed to have happened according to the history of these biblical figures. Yeah. There is a mere casual mention after the, ascension of Jesus, past the Gospels. Then you have all these other epistles, the books of Jude, the books of Acts, the Apostles, the Colossians, the Thessalonians, blah, blah, blah. It's like the stuff after Jesus. Mm. There's a mention in book Jude chapter 1, verse 14, and Enoch also, the 7th from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, behold, the Lord cometh with tens of thousands of his saints. All right, so that's it. That is the entire biblical reference of Enoch.
Wow.
But... okay, so here's where it gets dicey. So we're talking in the Middle Ages, or maybe even before. There's a 1,000-year window for some of these texts that we're about to explore where like scholars and archaeologists have no literal agreement when some of these there's a 1,000-year window. Maybe it was in the Middle Ages, maybe it was in the BCE time.
Oh, whoa.
They don't know. But what's accepted is that they're authentic texts in Merkaba mysticism and Kabbalah, which again, Kabbalah is esoteric Judaism, okay? And I didn't make much mention of this, but in Islam, there's mentions of Enoch.
Really? By the name Enoch?
No. But it is Enoch.
Gotcha.
It is, I actually wrote that one down. Hold on. It is by the name, I think it's Ezra.
Okay.
Metatron. Maybe I didn't write the
Shout
Islamic
out to
scripture.
Flash.
Right? Okay, I didn't write the Islamic quote. But the point is, Christians, Jews, like Judaism, the practicing belief, and Muslims all have some significant reference, and I mean like exoterically, meaning this is accepted to be historically significant by these different cultures and religions, that this figure was a prominent figure with mystery and intrigue and mystique, right?
Huh. But they all talk so little about him.
Right. Well, I suspect that's because it was, slashed. Like, Okay. So in the 1940s, I believe, if we go back to like real modern human history, I think it was the 1940s. I think. It might have been 1945. It was actually supposedly mere months before Israel was formed as a nation. You know how that went down, right? Like Israel was never legally a nation until World War II concluded.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
It was just shortly before or just shortly after. I'm not a history buff.
Sure.
But around the time Israel became a nation in the 40s, they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's the books of Enoch.
Right, the Book of Enoch.
Now, the Book of Enoch, whether the contents of the Book of Enoch are true or not, that's not what I'm focusing on here. What I'm focusing on here is it's archaeologically significant. It's dated to have been written at least 2,000 years ago. And the point that we should consider here, and these are conversations I've had with scholars of religion, like prominent scholars of religion through, like we know Dr. Diana Pasolka, my family, and some of her colleagues. I've had chats about these things with them. Not anybody that I want to name publicly, but the consensus in academia is that the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the time that they were written, were as heavily guarded and were treated with the same level of reverence as what would be known as the Temple Scrolls. So remember, the Bible wasn't officially published until the 300s. I think it was published, you could look this up, it was published in Africa, or like put together in Africa in the 300s, maybe like 365 or something like that. So we have to understand, like, these religions before, we're in 2023 and you can go to Walmart and buy a Holy Bible.
Yeah.
We're talking, they're small, relatively to the world at the time, they're what you would truly call a cult. And I don't mean that in a negative connotation.
No, it's just fully boots on the ground, like just distributing to a
They're
small...
passing their knowledge.
Yeah.
Right. And like the priestly class had the temple where the inner sanctum of the temple is where they held these original scrolls that we now know of today as the books of the Bible. And then and like, I think it was like 70 AD or something to that effect is when the Romans came and they like destroyed the temple, sacked it, just took everything. That's why in the Gospel of Mark, you have some of this kind of like radical, anti-Roman, kind of like apocalyptic vibe to it, because it was actually written in 69 AD. In real human history, in 69 AD, the Jews were like, this is the fucking end of the world. Like, the Romans are oppressing us. It was literally like within a year of that gospel being written, it all went down. My point is, the Dead Sea Scrolls were a part of those collection of inner sanctum scrolls that at the time, the religious class were like...
hiding them.
These are sacred.
Yeah.
And it's believed, this is why they were skirted off to a cave in the Dead Sea. And then, of course, in the 1950s, we find the Nag Hammadi library. That's the Gnostic text, different story. Okay. So in the book of 3 Enoch, the books of Enoch, I can't remember how many there are. There's like 40 or something like that. But in the book, it's it's just like in the book of John, there's there's so many chapters.
I know what you mean.
And they're kind of like little books of their own.
Okay, gotcha.
In the book of Enoch, particularly in the third Enoch, is where, according to these scrolls, it's revealed that when Enoch was not, when he, assumed a divine transformation into a being of the angel status, he didn't die a physical death. God took him. It's revealed that he ascended into a being known as Metatron. Now,
it says that in the scrolls.
Oh yeah. Well, it gets more interesting than that.
I had always assumed, because you've mentioned in passing before, like, a lot of people think Metatron is Enoch. Like,
no, it is.
Yeah, I always assumed that was like implied by like historical records or like the time they were written about. I assumed it was corroborated, but you're saying it's actually written in.
It's written.
Whoa!
But it gets deeper than that.
Okay, let's go.